The radar scope is clear. That's the problem. You're doing 1,200 miles per hour at 50,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean on a simulation intercept. And you know, there are two enemy aircraft somewhere in the airspace ahead of you. You cannot see them. You cannot detect them. Your radar, the most advanced airborne radar ever built, is showing you nothing. They're there. And they can see you. You have 4 seconds to make a decision before they can fire. You push the throttle past the detent into afterburner. The F-22 responds like a living thing, 70,000 pounds of thrust slamming you back into the seat harder than a car crash. And you brake left, 9 Gs, your vision tunneling to a gray circle, and you think, this is why they only give this jet to the best 300 pilots in the world. This jet was built to win a war before the enemy knows the war started, and you are the one they trust to fly it. This is your life as an F-22 Raptor pilot. From the first day you ever touch the controls of a propeller plane to the moment you sit at the top of the most lethal flying machine ever built. Rank 1. Student Pilot. You don't start in a fighter. Nobody does. You start in a T6 Texan II, a 1,100 horsepower turboprop that feels enormous the first time you sit in it, and embarrassingly small the first time you almost crash it. Day 1 of undergraduate pilot training is not what you expected. There are no jets, no afterburners, no Mach speeds. There are PowerPoint slides about aerodynamics and weather and engines and a check ride schedule that controls your entire life for the next year. The class starts with 24 people. Not all of them will finish. The T6 is where the Air Force finds out who can really fly. Not who can pass tests. Not who looks good in a flight suit. Who can actually take a machine into the sky and bend it to their will when everything is going wrong at once. Your first solo is 12 minutes long. You take off, fly a single traffic pattern, land. Nobody is watching. Nobody cheers. You taxi back to the ramp and sit in the cockpit alone for a moment, your hands still shaking slightly, and you think, this is real. I actually did that. Your instructor debrief is 4 minutes. He tells you what you did wrong. There's no mention of what you did right. That's pilot training, 6 months of T6. Then, the track selection. The Air Force looks at your grades, your evaluations, your performance, and they assign you a track. Heavies, the big cargo planes and bombers, helicopters, or fighters and bombers. The fighter track means T-38 Talons, supersonic trainers that are 40 years old and will kill you if you're not paying attention. The T-38 is where the Air Force separates the people who can fly from the people who can fly fast. First supersonic flight. You push through Mach 1 over the Texas Panhandle at 35,000 feet, and the plane doesn't shake, doesn't shudder. It just goes quiet. The world gets very smooth. You're moving faster than sound, which means you're moving faster than the noise you make. Nobody can hear you coming. You pass the T-38. You graduate pilot training. The ceremony is real this time. You receive your wings, a small silver pair of wings pinned onto your chest by someone who loves you. And you are now a rated United States Air Force pilot. Then they tell you your jet assignment, F-22. Of the entire graduation class, 2 people get it. You're one of them. Rank 2. F-22 Wingman. The first time you sit in an actual F-22 and they close the canopy, you feel the silence. Not silence like quiet. Silence like isolation. Like the cockpit seals you away from the entire world, and now it's just you and $19 million of the most lethal aircraft ever built, and 210 pages of checklists you have spent 6 months memorizing. The F-22 Raptor is a 5th-generation stealth air superiority fighter. That sentence doesn't do it justice. It cruises at Mach 1.5 without an afterburner. Super cruise. No other jet in the world does that. It can super maneuver, hit angles and attitudes that should cause a stall in any other aircraft. Its radar actively deceives enemy systems. At certain aspects, it has the radar cross-section of a metal marble. The F-22 doesn't outfly the enemy. It makes the enemy fight a ghost. As a wingman, you fly on someone else's wing. You are number 2, number 3, number 4 on the formation. Your job is to protect your flight lead, execute the tasked mission, and survive long enough to learn. You speak only when spoken to on the radio. You make no decisions that aren't cleared. You watch everything and say nothing. You deploy. The location is classified. What you're doing is classified. You fly missions you cannot describe, over airspace you cannot name, intercepting contacts that will never appear in any news report. The work is silence. The work is waiting at 50,000 feet for a phone call that may never come. The work is being so ready for so long that readiness becomes the baseline of your existence. You eat while strapped in. You fly 8-hour missions with a tube for bodily functions and a bag lunch from the flight kitchen and nothing to look at but the radar scope and the wingman 2 miles off your 6. Most flights, nothing happens. That's the deterrence. The enemy knows you're there, somewhere, invisible, watching. And that knowledge changes every calculation they make. On one flight, something happens you can't talk about. Suffice to say, the system worked, you land, debrief for 4 hours, and fly again the next day. Rank 3. Flight Lead. Flight Lead qualification changes something in how you think. As a wingman, the mission happens to you. As a flight lead, the mission is yours to shape. You brief the foreship. You plan the intercept. You make the calls when things go wrong, and things always go wrong. Your first 4-ship flight lead. 2 of your wingmen lose their radios simultaneously. Standard procedure says abort. Your judgment says you can complete the mission with visual signals and backup comms. You proceed. You bring everyone home. The debrief is 2 hours long. Your squadron commander doesn't say you were right. He says you were decisive. That's the best version of right. Tactical leadership is about managing chaos fast. A flight of 4 F-22s in a contested airspace is 4 individual human beings making split-second decisions in separate cockpits at supersonic speed. Your job is to hold them together through radio calls, pre-planned signals, and the trust you've spent years building. You learn that the hardest part of flying the F-22 is not the aircraft. The aircraft is the most intuitive platform you've ever touched. It was designed to be. The hard part is making perfect decisions at 1,000 miles per hour with incomplete information while someone on the ground is yelling in your earpiece and your fuel state is declining and one of your wingmen just lost radar. You stop counting flight hours at 1,000. The number stops mattering. What matters is what you did with them. Rank 4. Weapons Instructor Course, WIC Patch. The Weapons Instructor Course is 6 months at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. They call it the patch because graduates wear a special patch on their shoulder. The patch is not a decoration. It is a signal to every other pilot in every room you enter. It means you are the person who knows, not the person who flies best, though you must fly well to get here. The person who understands the fight at a level most pilots never reach. The washout rate is not published, but you know people who went and didn't come back with the patch. Nobody talks about it. WIC teaches you to think like the enemy thinks. You study every threat system ever built. Russian SAMs, Chinese fighter tactics, integrated air defense networks. You understand not just what the enemy can do, but why they do it, and how to break their decision cycle before they finished forming a thought. You fight against aggressor aircraft piloted by instructors who mimic enemy tactics with terrifying accuracy. You lose, badly, in the first weeks. They want you to lose. They want to find every hole in your mental model and tear it open while you still have time to fix it. By month 4, you stop losing. By month 6, you are the most dangerous thing in controlled airspace. The patch ceremony. 6 people in a room. No speeches, no cameras. You put it on your shoulder and you understand, for the first time, why this was worth everything you gave up to get here. Rank 5. Instructor adversary pilot. You go back to the squadrons now as a WIC graduate, but you're different. You are the one who trains. You take young wingmen, the version of you from 5 years ago, and you teach them how to lose properly. Losing in training is information. Every kill on you is a lesson. You give them the loss on purpose. You let them think they have you. Then you show them why they don't. The best debrief you ever run lasts 3 hours. One of your students gets defensive. He thinks he flew well. You show him, frame by frame on the radar playback, the exact moment the decision that got him killed was made. Not when he pulled the trigger. Not when the missile flew. The decision was 40 seconds earlier in a radio call he made that telegraphed his entire game plan to the enemy. He sits in silence for a long moment. Then he says, "I need to fly it again." That's the one you know is going to be excellent. Rank 6. Squadron Commander. Command is different. You are no longer the one flying the mission. You are the one who decides who flies the mission. You are the one who signs the orders. You are the one who sits in a room when a jet doesn't come back and finds the words to say to the people waiting. That happens once during your command. A training accident. One aircraft, one pilot, a man you trusted. A man who trusted you. The investigation takes 6 weeks. You know before it finishes what the report will say. Pilot error. He flew past the edge of the performance envelope, and the envelope closed around him. There was nothing you could have done. You knew the risk existed. Every F-22 pilot knows the risk exists. That's why the selection is so brutal. That's why the training never ends. You send a letter to his family. You drive to his house yourself. You stay for 4 hours. His wife asks you what he was like up there. Not in the accident, just up there, in general, when he was flying. You tell her what it's actually like. The silence at 50,000 feet. The way the world looks from that altitude. The way the sun hits the cloud tops at Mach 1.5 and the whole sky turns gold. She cries. Not from grief, exactly. From the image of it. From knowing her husband got to see something most people never will. You don't tell her he was one of the best you've ever flown with, because that would make her cry for a different reason, and she's already cried enough. You drive home alone. You go back to the squadron. The mission continues.